Good afternoon. Welcome to the NISS Virtual Career Fair. My name is Sam Wolford. I'm Director for the Center for Quantitative Analysis at Bentley University, and I'm going to moderate the webinar. The Career Fair today will feature 5 speakers from different organizations and industries who will talk about their perspectives on job opportunities, particularly in their organization, the range of analytic skills that they see that are critical to success in their organization, typical career paths, and any advice they might want to share for students entering the job market. So the logistics of how this will transpire is each speaker will have 15 minutes to cover those topics, and then participants, if you have questions for the speakers, you can ask your questions using the Q&A box, which appears on your Zoom screen down toward the bottom. So if you move your cursor toward the bottom of the screen, you'll see a small box that says Q&A. If you open that, it gives you an opportunity to ask your questions. I will try and forward your questions to the speakers as time allows after their talk. Otherwise, we do have a 25-minute session allocated at the end to try and cover all your questions and answers. So having said that, let's move forward, and I will introduce our first speaker, who is Tim Hesterberg, who's a senior statistician at Google. So Tim, go ahead.
All right, thank you, Sam. And I will share some slides. So the talk today I'll start by telling a little bit about my career, and there are a couple of themes there that I'd like to share with you. That statistics is an interesting career with a lot of variety, and don't give up if something goes wrong. There's a lot of opportunities in statistics, and if something doesn't work out, other things will. And then I'll give some advice about Google in general, about Google in particular, and some additional general advice. So I'm a statistician at Google, previously undergrad math, PhD in statistics, worked at Pacific Gas and Electric Company, was a college prof, and then worked at a software company in the research department. Also active in Sierra Club, in a nonprofit where we take computers to third world countries with high school students to set up computer labs. And I like to do water bottle rockets with kids. So my first real job, professional job, was at Pacific Gas and Electric Company in a kind of internal think tank. And my big project was simulating fuel oil inventory. PG&E has a very diverse system with a lot of sources of electricity, the last choice of which is oil. And the question was how much oil to carry in inventory for going into the winter. And this depends on how much rain we get in the Pacific Northwest for hydroelectric power, how many nuclear outages, how much wind we get, etc. And so I did a big simulation, basically generating artificial years of rain, etc., and seeing what happened, and then optimizing the fuel oil inventory. And the thing is that that at the optimum, outages will be rare, because when outages happen, when we run out of everything, including oil, that's bad because people go without electricity. Whereas the cost of carrying an additional barrel in inventory is relatively small. So outages should be rare, and that makes the simulation difficult. The interesting cases where there are outages are rare, and so in the simulation we oversample them. Colder years, drier years, less hydropower, nuclear outages. And then we've done bias sampling. So to counteract for that bias, we reweight our results. If a particular artificial year was twice as likely with our bias sampling to occur as it would be with unbiased sampling, then we'll give it a weight of 1/2. And then we compute things with a weighted average. And this is where things get interesting. I used a weighted average that looks like this thing at the bottom, summation of the weight times measured value divided by the summation of the weights. Shared that with my boss, and he said, oh, you divide by the weights. And my reaction was sort of, well, yeah, of course, doesn't everybody? That's what makes sense. It turns out that if you look in the literature, that's not what people did. People would typically divide not by the sum of the weights, but by the number of observations. This gives an unbiased estimate, but on the other hand, it gives estimates that just don't make sense in many situations, where the probability of an outage plus the probability of an outage not occurring don't add up to 1. And so this dividing by the sum of the weights is just common sense, but that's not what is in the literature. And so that led into my dissertation. So theme for you is don't give up on your common sense. Don't necessarily pay too much attention to the literature. Read it critically and think about what really makes sense. Then I moved to academia, was at a small college, small colleges, small classes, lots of student interaction, did summer research with the students, did a lot of consulting, interesting consulting projects, but I didn't get tenure. Boy, was I bummed. But as it turns out, I'm glad I didn't, because I've enjoyed the things that I've done since then more. So the lesson for you is, if something doesn't work out, move on. There are a lot of different statistics jobs. You'll find something better. Then moved on to the S+ company, the commercial predecessor of R, where I was in the research department, but did a variety of things, some consulting, some training courses, et cetera, et cetera. And I enjoy that variety. And one thing about being a statistician is you get a lot of variety, both in the subject areas. Statisticians get to play in everyone's backyard, in terms of a famous quote, and we can also contribute in a variety of ways. Now, I'm at Google working on a variety of projects. My current project is trying to estimate which ads are less annoying so that we can promote a better ad system so that people aren't using these real annoying pop-ups, using ads that are less annoying but still effective. I've worked on a variety of other projects, some of them listed here. I do a lot of miscellaneous consulting at Google. So a little bit about Google. How does Google make money? Well, you do a search like flights to Hawaii and we'll show ads. You click on the ads and we get money. That's great. Or maybe not. This is the kind of search I usually do. Look at all those ads. I rarely see ads, except a few years ago when I was looking for a new car. All of a sudden, I was seeing a lot more ads than I was ever used to seeing, and I wanted to see them. That's what Google wants, is if you don't want to see ads, we don't want to show ads. If you do want to see ads, then we want to show ads. If we show ads when you don't want to see them, yeah, we'd make a little more money in the short term, but in the long run, you'd learn to ignore ads altogether. We call that ads blindness. So getting these pages right is really important to Google. And so we do a lot of experimentation. You know, data mining is all the rage, but we get too many candidates who really only know data mining and don't know a lot of other statistics. In contrast, experimentation is something we don't see enough of in terms of candidates. And we do a lot of experimentation. When you come and search on Google, you may be in the active arm of 100 experiments and the control arm of 50 times that many. We're experimenting with these pages, with every aspect of the page, with improving the search results, with improving the relevance of ads, with the layout of the page, the font size, the color, with back-end stuff for serving results quicker, with when you start typing, how we give completions, etc. So we do lots of experimentation. And a little bit of background is that a lot of the experimental framework in statistics was designed back at Rothamsted Agricultural Research Station by Sir Ronald Fish and colleagues. And that was very much a plan things in advance, let things grow, get the data at the end and analyze it situation. Statistics is moving away from that. In clinical trials, they now do interim analyses. They analyze the results not only at the end, but at various times in between. And on the web, we can do things essentially continuously. We can reanalyze after every observation. So for example, if you're trying to optimize a web page, you can create multiple versions of the web page, add some JavaScript from Google to the default page, the one that people come to. And this JavaScript randomly leaves them on that page or sends them to an alternate version of the page, and then records if they do what you want. Buy something, make a donation, download some software. So this type of thing is increasingly important. And if you want to look it up, look up multi-arm bandit. I also do a lot of bootstrapping. I'm still interested in statistic education, co-author on a book, Chahar and Hesterberg, Mathematical Statistics with Resampling in R. And bootstrapping, permutation tests are very important in statistical practice. They're typically more accurate than the classical formula methods, depending on which bootstrap method you use. They're easier to apply. With them, you can do better statistics. For example, you're no longer limited to simple statistics like a mean, for which there are nice formulas. We can use means or trim means or more robust statistics. And in some cases at Google, these methods are faster than using the formula approaches. So I'll refer you to the article that I wrote, What Teachers Should Know About the Bootstrap, the American Statistician 2015. And I'll be a little vain and say it's frankly what every statistician should know about the bootstrap. There's a lot of good stuff in there. If you go to a program and you're not a statistics program and you're not learning about the bootstrap, that is not a program that is teaching what matters in practice. All right, moving on to Google. We've got statisticians doing lots of different things at Google. Google is very data-driven, and Google has recognized the value of statistics since the early days. And variety of locations, California, New York, Washington, etc. Lots of different opportunities. If you're interested, go to google.com/careers and look for what's available. Now, our four main criteria for hiring statisticians are, first of all, statistical knowledge. Second is data intuition. Can you work with data and figure out what's there, what it's telling you? For this, having done some statistical consulting is valuable. So if you're at a school that has a statistical consulting workshop, drop-in, lab, it would be good to be involved in that. Third criteria is computation. And the language doesn't matter so much, as more the fact that you are able to do computing. If you know one or more languages, then you can pick up others. Some parts of Google are moving away from R toward Python, but R still gets a lot of use. And then finally, communication. And this is extremely important at Google. We do all our work in teams, and being able to communicate in both directions, explain and understand what the people are saying, is extremely important, both written and verbal. And then other criteria include leadership, initiative, teamwork, and what we call Googliness. Basically, do you make Google a better place? For internships, look at google.com/students, and in some of the relevant internships are not posted yet, but will be posted. So keep checking that site. There will be some other internships that are relevant for statisticians. So some general tips. First of all, at the bottom, you might want to check out my document, Advice for Statisticians Interested in Working at Google, and there's a short URL for it. We could use more people with experimental design, and of course, big data is very valuable at Google. But we're also interested in good general all-around statisticians. When you are applying, preparing for an interview, review some of the core statistical ideas and methods and be sure that you can explain them. Uh, in the interview itself, think out loud. What are some advantages and disadvantages of different approaches? What are some things that might lead you in one direction or another? Don't be afraid to ask questions. View this as a kind of a consulting engagement. Try and figure out what the problem is and different directions you could go. And go ahead and admit something if you don't know it. Don't panic. Your interview is not going to be perfect. So if you're blanking on something, just say it and move on. One thing I'll suggest is creating a consulting resume. Different consulting projects you've been involved with, the approaches you used, what was interesting about those projects. Skills, stat consulting program, experimental design, and the scientific issues that are key to statistics. How do we avoid bias? Writing is very important, and doing presentations. Now, some general advice is choose interesting work, not necessarily something that makes you the most money, but something that will let you grow and that you'll enjoy. Live frugally, so don't buy the most expensive house you could get or the most expensive car. Saving up some money then gives you a lot more flexibility in terms of your future job choices and reduces stress. And try to arrange things so that you don't have to drive a long distance or spend a lot of time commuting. Try and live close. If you can walk or bike to work, that is terrific for your health and saves a lot of money and stress. And finally, get involved in professional groups. This is a way for people to get to know you and ultimately is good for your career. So a good way to get started is to organize sessions for JSM, whatever section that you're most interested in, the data mining section, for example. Volunteer to organize an invited session or you've contributed session, topic contributed session for that group and give talks. All right, that's basically it. Thank you. Sam, you're muted.
We have a couple minutes, so if anyone has a question for Tim, again, I would encourage you to use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Type in a question, and I will pass it along to Tim. I'm not seeing any questions at the moment, so let's give it another few seconds, and if there aren't any, then we can move on to the next speaker.
Hey, Sam, this is Glenn. There is one in the chat here, and the question is, would you mind elaborating on Google's and your conceptualization of the phrase big data? And that's, I guess, addressed to Tim.
Okay, big data can mean a lot of different things. And one thing about that I've experienced is at Google is that I'm often working with huge data, but I'm using tools at Google that hide that from me so that I don't actually need to do a lot of extra work to handle the big data. And then I see now there's another question. What opportunities are there at Google for statistics master's students? Yep. Most of the hiring that we do is for PhDs, but we do hire some masters and even undergraduates, depending on the area. So look at the job posting and see what the requirements are. Now, one thing I'll say is that if you don't meet all the requirements for a particular job posting, consider applying anyway. And in particular, women, go ahead and put yourself out there. Men will typically apply if they meet most of the criteria. Women may hold back. Well, go ahead and go for it. And
then, Tim, is there any opportunities for new graduate master's students?
We do hire some new grads, masters, or even bachelors, mostly PhDs, but some of the other, and just look at the postings. I will really recommend, if you can get an internship at Google or at other places, that's great, because you get a better idea of what life in the working world is like, and people get to know you and know your work. And so that gives you a leg up on eventually getting hired permanently.
Okay. Thanks, Tim. I just a comment to everybody participating. If you'd please forward your questions through the Q&A box rather than the chat forum. We're kind of trying to watch the Q&A box in particular. Okay, so next up, I'd like to introduce Dan Holder, who's Executive Director of Biostatistics and Research Decision Sciences at Merck. So Dan, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Sam. First of all, can you see my slides?
Yes.
Perfect. So thanks again for NISS for inviting me to the job fair. And my hope is to give everyone some insight into what it's like to work at Merck in particular, but I think most of what I'm going to say is applicable to just about all the large pharma. So first, a few facts about Merck. Many of you probably know that Merck is a large pharmaceutical company. We also make vaccines and have animal health. Headquarters in New Jersey. It's a big company, so we have high revenue. Lots of people work at Merck. So I took this from the website, 69,000 as of 2018. And you can see our senior leader right there, Ken Frazier, who appears on the news quite often. The mission at Merck: to discover, develop, and provide innovative products and services that save and improve lives around the world. And so I bring this up because if you want to work at a place where every day you get up in the morning and feel like you're doing something that's contributing to society, a pharmaceutical company is not a bad place to work, because the things that we do in our very mission is all around trying to improve people's lives and save people's lives. There are a lot of statisticians at Merck. Some of them are not in research, but the vast majority of them are in research, and all my experience pretty much is in research. So I'm going to pretty much limit my comments to what's going on in research, but just note in passing that we do have statisticians in manufacturing and marketing and other areas as well. Also, Merck is a global company, so we certainly sell products all over the world. We have other types of activities all over the world, like manufacturing. But primarily the places we have statisticians are at our two big research hubs in Rahway, New Jersey, and in West Point or Upper Gwinnett, Pennsylvania. So it's basically in the Northeast. We do have some statisticians in China, some other folks in Europe and Belgium, and some folks in London and the UK as well. Okay, so to really understand what statisticians do in pharmaceutical companies and at Merck, and kind of a distinction between what this large group of statisticians do, because some people do very different things than others, it helps to understand a little bit about the drug development process. So that's what I have depicted here. And I'm not going to worry so much about the exact numbers, but essentially we start out with lots and lots of chemicals and lots of targets. And we narrow things down pretty quickly to only a few compounds that get tested in humans. And of the ones that get tested in humans, not all those make it to the approved drugs and vaccines. So there's a real winnowing process as you go. And each of these phases, as we like to call them, take time. So again, not every therapeutic area, not every compound goes through the same sort of process, but just in general, the discovery process takes multi-years, often 2 to 4. And then human testing in clinical trials takes usually 3 to 7 years. And then you have all the regulatory submissions. And then we are looking at things like safety and possible other uses for drugs, pretty much for the whole length of a product's existence. So, like I mentioned before, what statisticians do in these different phases really differs. So I want to start kind of at the earliest part, in the discovery part. And I'm not going to go through these slides every single line, but just kind of give you some examples of what goes on. So in discovery, we're looking at target identification and validation, trying to find compounds that work against targets. synthesizing the compounds, doing things like laboratory and animal testing, and then very important these days is finding assays and biomarkers that let us measure things about either the compound or its use or how it's affecting living systems. So with those, you can imagine a whole variety of different scientific experiments. I'll just hone in on a few, as I mentioned. One is high throughput screening. So we have a target and we're trying to find compounds that hit that target. We have these vast libraries of millions of compounds, and often it's too expensive and too time consuming to try to measure every compound. So we build models that essentially take the ones that we've tested and try to tell us which direction we should go in to find more that are going to be hits. And so we've been doing this for a long time. We've been using machine learning in it for a long time. So here at Merck, we sort of pioneered the idea of using random forest to do what we call QSAR, quantitative structure activity relationships. In later years, we put some of our data up for a Kaggle competition, and the winners of the Kaggle competitions were deep neural nets. So like many other folks, we've incorporated deep neural nets into the process. And I kind of want to just throw that out there as, most of the statisticians at pharmaceutical companies are not doing machine learning, but certainly in the discovery area, folks like Merck have been doing it for a long time. We do a lot of development of assays, and sort of the interesting thing, I think, or probably the most interesting thing of assays is design of experiments. So we do a lot of that here. And then the last thing I highlighted there was discovery and evaluation of biomarkers, because a lot of my team gets involved in that. Often these days, biomarkers come from complex technologies like next generation sequencing for genetics, imaging analysis, proteomics, flow cytometry, all pretty complicated technologies, all requiring, many of them producing very complex and sometimes large amounts of data. And our scientists need a lot of help trying to interpret and understand that data. And that's where statisticians often come in. Moving from discovery, we move into human testing. Phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 are often terms that get used when people talk about pharmaceutical testing. Phase 1 and 2 being the early ones with first in human and early dose ranging and proof of concept. And phase 3 being the big safety and efficacy studies that eventually get used for registration with FDA and other regulatory agencies. Here again, there are a lot of interesting statistical challenges, but they're somewhat different than the ones that I talked about back in discovery. These days, for instance, at Merck, we do a lot of cancer studies. And the big thing in cancer studies these days are umbrella trials and basket trials. So these being basket trials being trials where you might have a single compound, but used for a bunch of different types of cancer. So kind of they're all collected in a basket. And umbrella trials where you might use a biomarker to decide what treatment regimen individuals get based on the results of those biomarkers. So these are kind of newish in terms of clinical testing, clinical studies. And certainly we have a lot of folks working in them. Phase 3 really carries over to the next slide because, as I mentioned before, phase 3 is where all the analysis and all the information comes from that eventually gets used to register compounds so that we can sell them. It is also the area where when most people think of what a pharmaceutical statistician does, they're often thinking of phase 3 clinical trials. And certainly here at Merck, by far the largest proportion of statisticians in research work in phase 3 clinical trials. And there, one of the interesting things that has gone on through the years is adaptive designs. So everyone is always trying to save money, resources, as well as make things easier on patients by making trials shorter. And so the idea of putting stopping rules in is something that gets used a lot, but also is a sort of area of very active research. Here, as you can imagine, these trials are used to register drugs, and so they're going to regulatory agencies, and so we pay a lot of close attention to what the regulatory agencies will accept and what sort of methodologies they find very convincing. And so often in this space, there's less freedom in terms of what sort of studies you can design or what sort of analyses you can use. But a lot of the art goes in the sort of upfront planning and design of the studies, exactly how you craft inclusion, exclusion criteria to get the right population, sample sizes and all those sorts of things. And I already mentioned adaptive designs and stopping rules, how you split up the false positive rate among different hypotheses in multiple testing situations. Those are the sort of the more relevant questions here, whereas, as I said, back in discovery, we're talking more about things like machine learning and those sorts of things. And then another area that's become exceedingly important is sort of what happens actually after you have the registration. And one of the big areas there is this area of health technology assessment. So in a lot of places, especially in Europe, having the drug registered is one thing, but being able to actually put it on the formulary in certain countries is another thing altogether. And often there you have to prove not just that your drug is safe and efficacious, but also that it's cost effective. And so there, a lot of health economics type arguments come in, a lot of risk benefit type arguments. And so that's kind of a newish area. And then, of course, an area that people have been talking a lot about recently is the use of real world data. So things like electronic health records to do things, like try to understand what happens to the efficacy and safety once you have a compound out in the real world. Or sometimes we try to use that data to help us design our phase 3 clinical trials. So just to review that in one different way, here at Merck, the research statisticians are broken up into these 6 groups. We have early development statistics, which does the discovery in the early phase 1 and 2. Late development statistics does phase 3, which are the big clinical trials. We have a whole group that does health technology assessment, which, as I mentioned, is proof of value. We have another small group that are exclusively interested in safety. So they don't work trial by trial, but they work more program by program to look and cross the entire breadth of the data to make sure that compounds are safe. And then we have a methodology group that works across all the stages to develop new methodology, which isn't to say it's not also developed in the different the other different groups, but they're sort of the meta group, if you will. And then we have statistical programmers that also work across all the stages. Career advancement, the usual thing is folks come in with a PhD or a master's degree as a senior scientist. And as they get more experience and better at applying their wares, they move up a ladder like this, all the way possibly up to sort of a vice president in the research track. Or some of them, as they get up on the track, decide that they want to manage other people. And so we have a management track that statisticians can go up as well. And they can make it the whole way up to vice president and possibly even higher. But I guess right now we don't have any statisticians higher than vice president. What are the things that really help you advance your career in a pharmaceutical company? I always like to think of it as 3 pillars. The first is your project work. So what compounds are you working on? Are you doing a good job on those at whatever phase that you're actually working on? The second is sort of professional type achievements. So this is giving external talks at like JSM and ENAR or other types of conferences, or organizing sessions, or being part of the local chapter and doing things there. And then the third part is usually departmental. So, sometimes we have review committees and other things like that. And being part of that certainly helps you go up the rungs of the ladder in your career. What do companies like Merck look for? Number one is clearly problem-solving skills. So having some technical statistical ability is important to that. And I'll kind of echo what Tim was saying. I mean, we look for solid statistics, because if you're going to be a statistician, you should know statistics. Computer skills are really helpful. Obviously, being able to program in one of the languages that we use, but also being able to move data around and clean data, things like that. Motivation, passion. We like to try to hire people who are going to be here a long time. And we find that if they really have some passion for what they're doing, that's much higher probability of that occurring. Just like Tim was explaining, we work almost entirely in teams. So cooperation and teamwork is essential. Communication skills, and I'll mention this again at the end, essential, and probably one of the most underestimated things that graduate students come to us not really understanding how much communication is part of the ball game. It's helpful if you have some biology and medical background, but it's not absolutely necessary. And just like Tim was saying, having some experience with applications, the best being sort of an internship or a co-op somewhere, but even if not that, working at the consulting lab at your university says a lot for being able to actually do applied statistics. I also put data science over there because certainly in the discovery area, we use a lot of machine learning and data science type techniques. And I think more and more, we like to try to hire people who have at least some experience with it, but it's not essential. And certainly we have a lot of people here being very productive who really went to school long before that was in fad or in vogue.
Dan,
yep.
I'm going to break in just because we need to move on at this point. And we will make your slides available for folks. But I think you've covered a lot of good things there. The questions that we have, you just answered. So
okay, well, let me just put up the last slide. Is if you want a job, we're on the web. So thank you.
Great, thanks, Dan. All right, so I only saw one question during that talk that I think he's covered reasonably well, but we can always come back to that at the end as well. So next up, we have Yenling Zhu, who is the Senior Advisory Statistician at Minitab. So Yenling, go ahead.
Hi. Hello. Yeah, my name is Yenling Zhu. I'm a Senior Advisory Statistician at Minitab. Different from Merck and Google, Minitab is a mid-sized company, about 300 employees globally. And because we're small, so we have to really focus. Our focus is on statistical software products. Minitab statistics software is our main product. We also have a data mining tool, like giving people tree-based methods. And on top of that, we have another product called Companion that really help people to do projects and manage their projects and make all kinds of process maps and optimizations. And then we also have a quality trainer, essentially helping people to understand different kinds of specialized methodologies used in quality, in the quality market. So if I'm not sure how many students heard of this Six Sigma methodology. That was kind of very hot from, I would say, from late 1980s to the beginning 2000. And that's when Minitab really became the dominating software used in quality market. So our main customers are Fortune 500 companies and quality engineers. Today, I'd like to talk about 4 types of positions that require statistical knowledge inside Minitab. The first one is statistical designer. That's where I started. I have been working at Minitab about 41 years. I really love what I'm doing, just so happy to be there. As a statistical designer, we require you have very broad knowledge, which I will give detailed description about this particular job. And here you need to be a PhD in statistics and with really emphasizing software engineering, software development. And the second type of position that minimum we say a Bachelor of Science degree, but I think would be better master in statistics. We call it statistical trainers. They are the people who go out to different organizations or public venues to train people how to use different packages or softwares produced by Minitab company, and emphasizing Minitab statistical software. And another type of position that requires statistical knowledge is what we call technical support specialist. So people here in the technical support department would be constantly communicate with customers and address their questions after let's say they purchased Minitab statistics software and they have technical questions, and they will call us. And so these are the experts to address their needs. The fourth type we call quality engineer. That's the title. Essentially what it does, it's in our development side. Development side has basically 4 functionalities. One is the designers, essentially create the initial design document. And then the second part of the functionalities is to implement the design into, let's say we use C++ to implement it. And then here is the quality engineer plays the role. They come in the same team. They have to come up with proper test plans to verify basically all the implemented code properly reflect the design documents. Any bugs and issues, they have to be able to verify using, let's say, Minitab macros or other software packages. So these are the 4 types of positions for statisticians. Let me next just give a little bit more details on each position, what type of skills are required. First, for a statistical designer, we really need a very broad, extensive knowledge on statistical methodologies. And depending on it really, you're not sure. Today, perhaps you have to perhaps develop, let's say, a machine learning tool. Tomorrow, it would be like gauge on R. So it depends on customers' requirements, the needs, we decide what to develop from one release after another. So as a statistical software designer, you really need to have very broad methodology background so that you can jump into any specific topic to be able to do extensive research that typically contains this couple of aspects. Number one, you need to really get into all the literatures and books and make sure you understand methodologies. Really, we say understand is inside out, know how to do the programming, how to implement each particular algorithms. That's one part. And also, typically, like as all these years, I keep a very close contact with subject knowledge expertise. So you would like to, for certain particular, let's say, method you like to develop, you're trying to get input from them on what kind of like major options are what options are major and what alternatives, like different approaches. And also you'd like to talk to potential customers to figure out, okay, is it after you design this command, can they use this command to solve their problems? So that's the research period. And after the research period, as a final statement, you need to write a detailed design document. And that design document becomes basically the only document to guide the development team, like software engineers, quality engineers, and information development expert to develop that particular functionality. After that, after design document is written, then you get different feedbacks, and then let's say go through different review stage, then you're ready to do the implementation. Then the designer is responsible for addressing all the technical questions and concerns, etc. So play a leadership role. After the command was implemented, then we typically do some alpha testing, send it to fields, let potential users to try, and then make proper modifications if needed. So that is considered the development cycle is done. After that, let's say a particular release, the particular feature is out, then this initial designer is also responsible for address any technical issues that come up from our technical support. In case they would not be able to handle, then the final questions would come to the technical initial designers. So these are basically the major functionalities, duties a statistical designer does. And for doing a good job, nowadays more and more, I think a fundamental skill is statistical computing algorithms. You're able to figure out how you can implement particular algorithms in, let's say, large data case or this typical desktop applications and improve the performance. And of course, all this period, you need explain yourself, the goals and things, so you need excellent communication skills. So that's for statistical designer, that position. And then trainer, as I mentioned, ideally, I think master level would be the ideal situation, because you gain enough knowledge and expertise in order to provide the necessary training to potential users. For training this position, you need working knowledge on the particular methods or softwares you're trying to teach people. So that definitely including Minitab statistics software and also other similar package do a lot of similar things. And also would be good your experience in, let's say, teaching in a commercial environment. Typically trainer, we send trainer to a company like GE or Motorola. Then you would be able to teach in that, feel comfortable and to do the teaching. Again, excellent communication skills. This particular position, trainers require about 50% traveling globally or nationally. So I think it would be a very exciting job if I were just fresh off school and do not have a lot of family duties. So, but if you, need a lot of, have a base to take care of your family, that might be an issue. So that's this particular job. And also would be preferable if you can speak a second language like Spanish, French, or Chinese well, but that's not a requirement. So that's the second type of position. And the third type is, as I mentioned before, is our technical support specialist. These are the people who really are our front line to face, to help our users if they have any questions using, let's say, a particular Minitab software. Here, they not only serve as just answer questions about our software. Very often we found users have a lot of really consulting. The questions is how they can analyze their particular data for certain goals. So it's like more like a consulting role. So this technical support person, basic requirement is you need to have at least some experience with talking to users on how to, like, helping people to use what kind of methods to solve different problems. And also, hopefully you have a very nice manner to represent our company because you're our front line. And you're also required to, any issues, for example, if they have certain problems and questions you're not be able to answer, you can capture it well and talk to the internal experts. And after that, convey the idea back to users. Meantime, we often really receive customer input and desires on particular functionalities. And so we'd like to record it in our task database. So as a technical support specialist, you are responsible to do that as well. So mainly that's for this type of position. And the last one, as I mentioned before, is called a quality engineer. Here you're essentially, you're the testers to make sure the developed command, say for a particular command, let's say just for very simple example, let's say classification trees. That's a particular command we're working on. Then after software engineers implement it, then you have to test to make sure all the results are correct. Initially, you have to prepare a very solid testing plan to cover different aspects of the command output and GUI part and different aspects. And would be good if you can write Minitab macros or even using any other software packages to help you to do the test. And after you find problems, you're responsible to log into our feedback on the bug database so that the software engineers and designers can look at it and address it properly. So that's all the 4 positions for statisticians. In terms of career paths, for each position, we have 4 levels. Essentially, the 4 levels are junior, senior, advisory, and senior advisory. So that laid out kind of a reasonable ladder for employees. Also, since we're a small company, you're more than really welcome. For example, if you're right now you're a quality engineer, but if you really want to be a software engineer, you want to be good at programming, then Minitab provide plenty of training opportunities. You can go out, take online courses, or go to any special conferences and trainings, or even get degrees on the specific areas you're interested in. Then come back, say, okay, I got this, I'd like to try this. So within the company, you have plenty opportunities to try different things that you're interested in. About current job opening, and here I copied a link. That's where you can find our opportunities and job openings. Right now, we're hiring statistical trainers. About suggestion, I guess I only from my very narrow perspectives. If let's say if you're a PhD candidate, you're interested in software development, working in a statistical software company, then having this solid statistical computing courses emphasize like how to effectively to let's say do a statistical algorithm implementation, that's a great plus. Also nowadays, as we know, more and more people use open source packages. It's just so convenient to use a lot of like Python code, R code to implement certain standalone packages. So if you are good at Python or R, I think that's a great skill. No matter not only your Minitab, think about data science. It's such a booming area. We just need lots of people to be able to handle data well and doing analytical, doing analysis to get insights. At the end, I'd like to see it's really, for me, so much fun to be a designer at Minitab. It's such a lovely workplace. Thank you very much for your attention.
And thank you, Yanling. And I haven't seen any questions come up. I know you need to leave the session, so any of the questions that any participant has, we will forward and get answers to those questions. So to keep things moving, I'd like to introduce Feng Chen, who is the Director of Advanced Statistical Methods at SAS Institute. Feng? I think you may still be muted.
Okay. Can you hear me okay?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, great.
Good.
So I work at SAS, and I will just doing what the previous speakers all did and give some background information specifically and some job career opportunities in SaaS. So SaaS is a private company software that's in Cary, North Carolina, and located in this triangle research area. The triangle is Duke, Chapel Hill, and Raleigh, anchored by, Durham. Duke at Durham, UNC Chapel Hill, and NC State. And Cary is off right here next to the Raleigh. It's a small community, bedroom community next to a mid-sized city. And that's where the headquarters of SAS is. This is a picture of the headquarters in North Carolina. It is, I don't know how, maybe a couple miles long. And that's the size of the campus. There's a lot of land here, and that's why they chose it. And they had the land. They bought it many years ago with it. We do have a farm next to us, and the part of the reason is because the SAS began by analyzing agricultural data, and then they became doing a statistical analysis system. It started in 1976, and then now it became what it is, a bigger company. Currently, there are about 14,000 employees worldwide. About 6,000 or 5,000 of them is in Cary, where the main campus is. That's where most of the R&D research area development is. That's where most of the analytics jobs are. There are some research center in, I think, a small one in Texas, a small one in Beijing, and a small one in India, but the majority of them is in North Carolina. We, as a company, I'm in statistics, but the company does a whole lot more than just software development in statistics, and now they're venturing into machine learning, big data, fraud detection, risk management, essentially providing both software and analysis capabilities to a wide range of industry, retail analytics and text mining in text analytics and so on. So these are some data science platform. Managing data is a big thing broadly in the company. Let's see. Just to give a sense of where most statistician jobs are, this is a very crude display of where I am in statistics in relation to the company hierarchy. So the company is organized by R&D, marketing, the sales and whatnot, that's on top. And then in the analytics, the groups are organized by products. So I am in the statistics product, where we make procedures that are relevant to statistical analysis. There are other groups that does ETS for financial data, enterprise mining, high performance analytics, operation research, and optimization. These are parallel organizations or smaller groups. And within statistics, we do all range type of all things statistics related. Of course, with nowadays, the merging of statistics, artificial intelligence, and machine learning becomes more of an overlapping area with high performance computing all comes in play. Some other groups in other sort of big divisions, one is solution products that providing analytical solution to a different industry, many different type of on-demand service. That always is a area where see a lot of hiring. It's just that they are in a different branch as I am in the advanced analytics, and that's the just want to tell where I am in there. Just talking about statistics, the stat product is responsible in developing all things statistics in general that having to do with different type of, motivation of complex data. We do linear regression, mixed effects, Bayesian, quantile, and observational study, which has become a large thing. Making software that's relevant to controlling for confounding, doing causal inference based on observational data sets, causal graphics, and then you do survey and the model selection, which becomes a large thing too, because they require scalable algorithms, does parallel and the distributed processing, computing, and so on. So these are the things that folks in my group are mostly focused on. But of course, then there are other people focused on other areas of statistics or using statistics for different type of purposes. All right, so answering the 5 questions. What are job opportunities for the people in my group or related? We call ourselves research statistician developer, and that does require PhDs in a particular statistics or biostatistics. You need to know a field very well. Then there are a large group that provide solution. They are called consultants. You can have the master's degree or extensive industrial experience would work, and they work in many different fields: risk, retail, fraud, banking, etc. So the idea is that we see a lot of customers that realize the importance of data and doing analysis of the data that they have, or perhaps using the data that don't have and help them making business decisions. And now these companies have data but don't necessarily have the resources, don't necessarily have the expertise in doing a holistic approach. I don't want to say holistic, but just doing an analytic project of them, and that's where the consulting team comes in play. So I think that the consulting team, what they all call professional services, that do touch a lot of different fields. It's a quick way of gaining a lot of industrial experience. Then there are also data scientists, and the data scientist is more to do with the backbone of doing managing different data analysis, mostly doing what do you call it, data-based data manipulation, because a lot of customers, they can collect the data, but the data they collect are in warehouse that are specifically to the company or industry, collected by people who have not necessarily have a consistent way of collecting data. So it's quite messy. And now the question of how to bring analytic solution to a data source that's gigantic. What do you do with that? How to process it? And that I think that's a big science and a big requirements in that area. And then there are also a lot of internship opportunities that's a year-round or summer positions. By year-round, I don't only mean that they station here throughout the year. There are such positions, but that there are also internship positions that last only, say, 6 weeks throughout the year, and college or graduate students would be able to have these opportunities as us. The skill of statistician needed. For my group, you have to know one thing in depth in one of the branches in statistics. I am in Bayesian statistics, so I do things such as PROC MCMC for Markov chain Monte Carlo, but someone would be in survival analysis, someone would be in survey analysis sampling. So the experiments of the ability to write large complex program in a low-level scientific language is very important. We are slightly different from Minitab in the sense that we don't have an expert telling a team how to write code. So the expert is a person who is in charge of the programming, so that we know exactly where things work and where things go wrong, where the bugs could be, and maintain that code. So the person is, so for example, I write and support all code in proc MCMC. And then the written and the verbal communication skills are exceedingly important. But that is just for the developed position in me, in my group. But if you are in the consultant and the data science, the ability to program and the ability to talk to people and verbally understand what customer need, understand the problem they can't clearly say, that's also very important as well. The track is similar to Merck and the Minitab. There's technical track. So research statistician developer is where it starts, and you become senior, you become principal. And this principal track is a career track. So once you are there, you do not need to become distinguished research statistician. Few people become distinguished research statistician developer. Parallel with the manager track is the usual suspect of a manager, senior manager, director, and senior director, and so forth. And of course, different groups have different separate category, but it is essentially the same. They're replacing statistician with software developer, OR specialist, and so on. So these are the parallel word in all groups in the organization. And are we hiring? Yes, there's very different type of various groups, and the best place to look is sas.com/jobs. And this is a page, and you just search for statistics, and then you will see a bunch of listings or machine learning or data mining for that matter. The last slides, what advice would you give to students based on the experience? I would say having an open mind, a flexibility, that is important. By that, what I mean is for any job you do, whether it's a dream job you think it is or not such a dream job, you are always going to be tasked to do things that you do not necessarily like. So you want to understand what they are. It comes with any job. So having that flexibility to deal with things that are mundane and not as exciting, but they are necessary to make a program run or to a product be made, it is very important to have that. And the second is to increase efficiency. Increase efficiency essentially just means get the stuff done. Finding more resourceful, knowing when to ask questions, when to ask for help, and when to hop in your office and trying to figure something out. Because typically students have the tendency of finding answers on their own, but when you work in an environment such as an industry, a company, the ability to run with people is very important. And there is no point of trying to figure things out that other people already know the answers to. So this is all reflect to finding a way of utilizing whatever you have, get the stuff done. Willingness to program is exceedingly important, I think, by and large, not only to whether you want to work at SAS or not, but just the ability to program and not to be afraid to learn a new language. And not only that, but learning a language in the way that why the language matters. You know, the advantage of Python is very different from the advantage of R, which is very different from SAS or S+, and just willingness to program. Communication, just to be able to talk to people is important. And then I think if you're a student, you want to more or less understand what this leadership is about. If you don't know what it is, you should start to think about it. This is all about planning ahead into integrating into workplace. In the sense that you don't want to be a technical worker that only takes input and not providing input. And it's leadership The idea of leadership is to participate in the growth of the company as you go along, and it's a skill. It is a skill that most technical students, PhD students, are not aware or unaware that you want to cultivate. But as you progress further down in your career, this becomes exceedingly important, and the earlier you become aware, the better. The last thing is publication. I know this looks a bit weird for industry, but this only refer to, this has a purpose. I say this has a purpose in this. This is for students who are international students who want to eventually become immigrant, green card, and citizen to the US, that if you work in a company, so this is how it works. The company will sponsor your H-1B, like SAS would do it. SAS, I know probably Google and Merck probably will do it too. But SAS will do it. And then now the H-1B is the permission to work in the US, and it's not immigration. It has 6 years. You can renew once, 3 years and renew, and you probably can renew again. But you want to start to solve the immigration problem, or however you want to do it, while you are H-1B. And sponsorship from the company would often, SAS would often sponsorship your immigration. And you have 2 categories to pick, EB1 or EB2. EB1 is harder than EB2. And we mostly would sponsor EB2 because, you know, that's just the nature of the job. But now this is where publication comes in. If you have publications and you have a large number of industrial like academic exposure, you can go to EB1. The difference between EB1 and EB2 is EB2 has exceedingly long wait time. Now EB1 is not even concurrent. So if you are, say, from China or from India and you apply for EB2, that takes like 7-year or 10-year of wait time just to get into the queue. EB1 will be your only way to go. And that's why, as a student, you are in graduate student, you should try to get as much publication, at least in the pipeline as possible, with your advisor, so that by the time you graduate, by the time you are ready to apply for immigration, you can go in the EB1 route. And this is what I observe with the immigration process of the developers in the company. And this is kind of advice that I would generally give. And that's it. I think this is it. I think this is all the my slides I have. So.
Thank you, Feng. I know that your last comments, I think, answered a number of questions that people have posted regarding sponsorship and H-1B visa status, etc. Again, different companies I know have different orientations and different objectives in that way. But yeah. Thank you for covering that. Again, to keep us a little bit on track here, I'm going to move ahead to Steve Cohen. We are tracking all the questions, and hopefully we'll have some free time at the end and we can get back to them. So Steve, why don't you go ahead? Steve is the Vice President, Statistical and Data Sciences at RTI International.
Okay, thank you very much, Sam. It's a great opportunity to have NISS sponsor this. RTI is a broad research organization, primarily dedicated to improve the human condition. And before I go into the details of the statistical program, I just wanted to give you an overview of some of the critical problems that we focus on, more in an integrated process in terms of connecting social and laboratory sciences, engineering, and international development, and really garnering both substance and statistical and technological solutions to particular problems. Just like Feng was talking about particular locations, might as well cover that. The headquarters is in Research Triangle Park. But we're really an organization with staff around the world. There are approximately 5,000 staff at the Institute, mainly in North Carolina, and other areas include, excuse all these pop-ups, but this is going to happen throughout the presentation, across the U.S. with Michigan, Georgia, California, Illinois, Colorado, North Carolina clearly, and Maryland, California, and international as well. And just to give you some idea of the practice areas, there's education and workforce development, international development, energy research, environmental sciences, social and policy, justice research, food security and agriculture, innovation in ecosystems. And you could see how that's connected in a matrix methodology in bringing the appropriate technology to bear. So with that said, let me get out of this, go into the presentation, and give you an orientation of my division. I'm Vice President of Statistics and Data Science, which is actually a division within a larger umbrella, which includes survey, computing, statistical sciences, in terms of implementing social science studies in a variety of technological, analytical, and methodological approaches. In addition to my division, there's a sister organization in biostatistics and epidemiology, a lot of synergies between our two divisions. My division consists of about 110 statisticians and data scientists, and there's similar numbers in biostatistics and epidemiology, with a very big connection to survey research, large-scale national surveys. And you'll see, as I go into the expertise of the center, there's a real flavor of bringing the appropriate statistical methodologies for large-scale national or international studies. So within my division, there are three core centers. The biggest one is the Center for Survey Statistics, and it's comprised, again, where we're connecting to substantive areas, which would be behavioral statistics, education statistics, international statistics, and social statistics. Then for the methodologies that are more state-of-the-art and not just directed to the analysis of complex survey designs, but more predictive analytics, channeling AI into statistical practice, as well as machine learning, that would be housed within this Center for Complex Data Analysis. And then I have a Center for Data Science of over 20 data scientists. So in our areas of expertise, we're very well recognized in areas of survey statistics, survey sampling, estimation, and analysis. Many of the national efforts are large-scale surveys, such as the National Survey on Drug Use and Health, very large nationally representative, state representative survey, and very, many individuals participate. So it's critical to be right up front in terms of the parameters of survey design, and from the front end to watching the data collection in, building in responsive design type methodologies, and then as the data comes back, all the estimation approaches, non-response, imputation, and the analysis of survey design complexities. So the type of efforts that we go forward with impose collaborative and statistical approaches to not just these surveys, but to core analytical studies, the appropriate analytical methods to advance the research enterprise in all the different areas that I covered, whether it's health, environment, defense, and other technologies that would benefit by statistical analytical approaches. In terms of the large-scale national surveys, there's a necessary expertise in terms of understanding the dimensions of multi-stage, probability sample designs, getting frames, optimizing the frames, trying to minimize cost, meeting precision requirements, and then when the data comes back, looking at patterns of non-response and all the methodologies to improve the accuracy of survey estimates and minimizing mean square error by approaches of both benefiting by precision improvements and bias reduction. A lot of work went into building the expertise both internally and for many of the research community that was doing analysis of large-scale national surveys and not really having the software to do the adjustments in terms of what's known as design effects that make you have much larger variances because of the clustering and the disproportional weighting in these designs. And so with the analysis and complex survey design, there's a lot of predictive modeling for patterns of non-response, trying to build in machine learning and data integration to help improve the accuracy. And then for more of the substantive areas where one wants to get the most accurate prediction models and appropriate analytical approaches, they're much more sophisticated approaches our statisticians have particular expertise in, which would include latent class analysis, linear and nonlinear mixed effect models. We have several psychometricians in our statistical division, quite a bit of use of Bayesian methodologies. That's becoming more and more prevalent in the next area where we have small area estimation modeling, where we borrow strength from other auxiliary information to get accurate information for areas that don't have sample sizes to accommodate direct estimates. Quite a bit of work in terms of the data scientists working with the statisticians to build client-centric tools for data visualization, dashboards, web applications, just taking big data that was brought up in prior presentations and trying to move the science in terms of harnessing all the data that's out there in a way that doesn't create bias, that finds the right signal of what the subset of the population is being covered. And so, just grabbing the data either through streaming and doing text analysis, using sensors, the internet, social media, and integrating the data is really an area that our statisticians are getting more expertise in and having more opportunities to use that approach. And so other things, again, more emphasis on the back end work, working with the substantive analysts, whether it's looking at the distribution of healthcare expenditures and looking at who are the high expenditure cases. In the US, 1% of the population is tied to 20% of the dollars, and 5 of us are tied to 50% of the expense. Looking at predicting who will stay at the high end of the expenditure curve and helping analysts with strategies to help mitigate that concentration. Predictive modeling, forecasting, again, psychometrics, data assessments, evaluations, and quite a bit of work is now going into giving the statistical foundation for using non-probability based sampling, which is clearly much more efficient, but the underlying foundations and statistical principles are not quite well developed. And having the opportunity to not use these just by themselves, but compositing them with representative samples and finding the right subset of the population that they are representing is a real challenge and an opportunity. Just some flavor of some things that connect with statistical methodology, using geosampling for methods of where there really isn't a well-developed frame, where there was listings, doing these, using the technology, whether it's satellites, or using drone imagery, again, for helping us in efficient ways. Again, there's a lot of emphasis for survey development. So a very large subset of my staff are survey statisticians, but using all the new technology is to come up with optimized designs to make the underlying effort as efficient, but also as representative as possible. I do want to spend a few minutes in terms of my Center for Data Science, because there is a very good overlap between the programs. And the analytical methods build on machine learning and predictive modeling. There's the text analytics and natural language processing, graph and network analysis, and building in artificial intelligence and deep learning. And then, you know, some back-end work to help the analysts with the, you know, incredibly important findings that might be buried in, you know, a ream of all these output tables to actually tell the story so that it's impactful and policy relevant, and quite a bit of software engineering. And then let me just finalize again with predictive analytics, trying to optimize the data that you have with the best models at hand to make best judgments to help policymakers assess what are the driving forces, what potentially might be movable, and a modification that could ameliorate a problem or improve a situation. And then building on the existing data, taking predictive models to come up with outputs going out to the future. And that requires a lot of validation, a lot of having historical data and recursive improvements to the data, and quite a bit of building these predictive models with decision trees and neural networks. Again, you can see the RTI website. I would advise you to go to that website. There's a wealth of information on the statistical expertise. I do have 10 fellows of the American Statistician, ASA, the Statistical Association, and the different types of opportunities are statisticians coming out of bachelor's programs, a very heavy concentration of statisticians out of master's programs, and many of them are getting either an extra degree in data science or applied analytics. And we do support professional development where several of the staff go on to get PhDs. Being in the triangle, there are these universities that are part of our founding institute, so we could draw on those universities for you know, close proximity. So again, look at the website and be glad to answer any questions that come up.
Thank you, Steve. So we've now heard from 5 different speakers coming from slightly different industries, and as we've captured some of the questions, I'm going to ask those that are still with us to turn their mics on. And I'd like to, we've had a lot of conversation about data analytics, data science, et cetera. There have been a couple questions that I think would be useful to address around how we define data science versus statistics versus data analytics. And maybe that isn't a consistent view across all organizations at this time. So, Steve, you want to take a crack at that? You manage both. How do you define it?
Yeah, it's Sam. It's a great question, and clearly it's a continuum. And a big differentiator would be, let me even build in computer scientists as well. And a data scientist would differ from a computer scientist by knowing more statistics. And the analytical model would be someone with applied analytics that brings in the best of what they've gleaned from data science and from statistics. But statistics is really foundational. It's the underpinning in terms of all the different analytical methodologies that one is trying to garner those underlying techniques to actually do hypothesis testing and assessing models, but actually getting strength from the implications of the findings from data science, from grabbing new information, new access to new data resources. It's also a different training model where I see many of my statisticians are more versed in terms of SAS or Stata, whereas the data scientists are using Python. R is also being used by all groups. But from the programs that they're coming from, there's a different set of tools that are being used as well. So to the extent you could actually integrate them, you're getting the best of all worlds. So let me stop there, and some of my colleagues have some other, you know.
I was going to say, let's open it up. Would anyone else like to take a crack at that from their organizational perspective? Tim, you want to say anything about Google's?
Sure, I'll go ahead. There's a lot of overlap. My title now magically changed to data scientist. Typically, data science is a combination of statistics, computer science, and the subject matter. And to elaborate on the Python, there are some groups at Google, like my own group, that are moving away from R toward Python because it's easier to go from prototyping to production when you start with Python, and easier to work with the software engineers who know Python, don't know R, or know R and just hate it because of some of the crazy things in R.
Dan, you want to say anything about Merck?
I was going to make the flippant comment that people tend to want to call themselves data scientists when they want to get paid more. But yeah, you know what? I mean, we have those things, and actually we have more of those sorts of discussions with our computer scientists than among the statistical group. We tend to think of things as the problems at hand, and it doesn't really matter how you label them. So when we're trying to do prediction problems, we tend to think of those as more data science-y. And when we're trying to do inference, we tend to think of that more as statistics. But there's certainly no hard and fast rules. And there's a whole seminar, right? This is a good time to plug the seminar tomorrow, right? Where we're going to talk all about that.
That's a good point. I will point out that there is another seminar tomorrow that NISS is sponsoring that will talk about what's in a name, which will hope to provide a little bit deeper dive into the different fields that are springing up around statistics. So for those of you on the webinar today, you might want to dial into that one as well. Let me throw out a couple other questions here that came up. One good one that I thought probably addresses most of the people's interests here is we've talked about a number of different careers for students and for those and from our different industry perspectives. But how would you recommend that students think about deciding on what kind of career to pursue? So if you're coming out of an academic program, where do you go?
So I would say there are really, from my perspective, two paths. One, if you're coming out of statistical programs, do you have a passion for one particular substantive area that you want to integrate your expertise to push the needle on some of the findings? And in many ways, my background's in biostatistics, although now I span a much wider field. But I was drawn to that field because I wanted to do health applications. Whereas there's another path, and I have staff that are excellent statisticians, and they're not tied to any one discipline. So I think having that, preference early on, and if you do get drawn to substance, you really have to embrace that science as well. It can't be a dilettante position. You really have to understand and be able to talk to the analysts to, better the final product.
Anybody else have a thought on that?
Yeah, I'll just reinforce that. I mean, certainly the people who succeed best in the pharma industry are people who have a passion about making a contribution to human health and so forth. And, if you're planning on a long career in an area, it really does help if you have a passion for it. And, you can't really think of it as sitting in an ivory tower and working on your computer. You really need to engage with the scientists or whatever subject matter area folks you're dealing with.
Okay. From a more practical perspective from many of the people maybe on the webinar today, I'm going to throw out some more concrete issues, such as can you suggest what typical pay scales might exist in the different companies or industries that we've been talking about? Particularly, I would say for the entry level maybe positions, what kinds of things, what kinds of ranges are we looking at?
I would just go to Glassdoor.com or Salary.com, and I think the numbers there are fairly reasonable. They are not off the scale. I don't know.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Okay, good response. Another question that came up is what is the recruiting season? So for students that are coming up for graduation this year, when should they be getting their resumes together and applications out? Is it different for different industries?
Oh, sorry. I just want to add to one more comments before the salary thing that I just did. And I think MStat does do a salary survey for industry, biostat. And I think that is also a source of useful information, especially if you want to. So the problem with salary.com is you don't know, it's self-reporting. Everybody's self-reporting, which is fine, but you don't know when it was reported. So it was reported 5 years ago, which makes a whole lot of difference. But with MStat of that year, the data that's, I would say, slightly more, put the things in frame more. So that was that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other question about recruiting seasons, et cetera? When should people be getting their resumes out, be looking for opportunities?
I'll just comment, because I saw this online in the questions too, is that, typically we don't prefer to hire folks who still have a year or so left. So probably in your last year. And a great time to go looking is at the big meetings like JSM and ENAR, because we always like those meetings because you can actually have face-to-face interviews with a lot of people at one time. So it's very efficient.
Dan, I would second that. We actually have a reception every year at JSM, and we also use the opportunity to meet with potential candidates. But it's really continuous. New projects come up and new expertise is needed. So, you go sometimes where there are the big conferences, but I would say it's more continuous. The one thing that's more consistent is that we have an internship program, and we want to know early in the fall who we're going to select for the next summer. And they want to make those decisions as well, because the best students are in high demand. So, we want to have like an orientation at some of the universities and get an applicant or two, and then have them commit.
Okay, anybody else?
And I'll chip in for us. For full-time, the hiring season is continuous, hiring all year. For internships, we are looking, in October is when the window will open for a couple of the positions. One of the windows will reopen in January, assuming the positions aren't full.
Okay. Another question that came up, which I found kind of interesting, is, and I know, Steve, you talked about a little bit, the role that Bayesian analysis plays these days in the statistical work that's going on. Does anybody want to comment on how Bayesian analysis might be factoring into their organization?
Well, let me just say, in the large-scale surveys, there's still a bit of reluctance by some of our clients to embrace some of the power that you would get. But for particular analytical questions, like we said, small area estimation, we're seeing more and more receptivity to it. But the large-scale national surveys are a big part of our business.
Okay.
At Google, there's a variety of Bayesian and other statistics. A lot of the software engineers we work with aren't as familiar with Bayesian methods. There are some applications where I will push Bayesian methods, others where we just go simpler and go with frequentist methods.
Okay, any other thoughts on that one?
I support Bayesian software assess, and we do see some more usage of Bayesian, both from a modeling perspective and also from doing production code. So it does scatter all over the place. But my understanding is that the machine learning, computer science field have adapted Bayesian methods to a stronger degree than statistician in all these utilize information in various different ways. So that's all that's about it. So. Okay.
Let me throw out one last question here. I'm going to combine a couple of questions that we got. One is, how interested or how would you recommend that students who maybe aren't coming from a purely stat background, so let's say they have a PhD in a related area, but have some statistics oriented in that program, or maybe they haven't in their own program had the opportunity to participate in some of the either data science or big data kinds of applications. Are your organizations still very interested in having them apply for positions? Let me put it that way.
Well, if they're coming out of a substantive program, we have several different units that are primarily analytical, whether it's education or health or environment, and those that are strong in their analytical skills would be very attractive. There's also qualitative benefits for those that have those skills as well. So, there's clearly opportunities, and it really is a stronger analyst who would have better grounding in statistics.
Okay. Anybody else want to weigh in on that?
Well, we hire across the spectrum, from statistics, computer science, and everything in between. There is a bit of a gap in terms of the application process. You would apply for a software engineering position, which is a lot of the CS people would apply for, or a data science position, which is more statistics. And if you're kind of in between, make sure to work with your recruiter to make sure that you are interviewed by appropriate people.
Okay.
And I'll just say at Merck, yeah, we hire across the spectrum. And, what I tried to show is that there's a lot of different types of jobs in the pharma industry, and different ones require different amounts of different areas of expertise. But certainly we do hire across the spectrum.
Okay.
My advice is that you want to read the job description and to make sure there's a match. Usually that's you apply for a resume, the HR at least assess, HR screens it, and before it's punted to another level, matching what you can do with what the description have a good match works for that. And then now once you talk to more and more people and you find out what the job entails, and then you take it from that step on.
Okay. All right.
Google is a little bit different in that regard, in that the job positions posted are sort of an opportunity to apply. You apply, and then once you're hired, then we figure out what the best position for you would be.
It may be a little bit like the old hockey adage that says, if you don't shoot, you don't score. So I'll leave it at that. We're getting to our end time, so I'd like to thank everyone who's been on the webinar for attending and for your questions. And I'd like to thank the presenters. I hope all the people participating have found the webinar useful, and you should always look forward or look for other opportunities that NISS is presenting to get more ideas as to how you might advance your career. I'll finalize with again, a plug for tomorrow's webinar for those of you who are interested in understanding more about how data science, statistics, deep learning, all that kind of good stuff, what all those names really imply. You can go on NISS's website and find the link for that webinar tomorrow. So thank you all for attending, and that will be the end of today's webinar.
Thanks.
Thanks for hosting.
Thank you.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Bye.